Well, nothing like recording your video and having all of the audio be terrible. So, round two. Jurgis talked lightly about work because he was young. They told him stories about the breaking down of men there in the stockyards of Chicago and of what had happened to them afterwards. Stories to make your flesh creep, but Jurgis would only laugh. He had only been there 4 months, and he was young, and a giant besides. There was too much health in him. He could not even imagine how it would feel to be beaten. That is well enough for men like you, he would say, siltness, puny fellows, but my back is broad. Jurgis was like a boy from the country. He was the sort of man the bosses like to get a hold of, the sort they make it a grievance they cannot get a hold of. When he was told to go to a certain place, he would go there on the run. When he had nothing to do for the moment, he would stand round fidgeting, dancing with the overflow of energy that was in him. If he were working in a line of men, the line always moved too slowly for him, and you could pick him out by his impatience and restlessness. That was why he had been picked out on one important occasion. For Jurgis had stood outside of Brown & Company's Central Time Station, not more than half an hour, the second day of his arrival in Chicago. Before, he had been beckoned by one of the bosses. Of this he was very proud, and it made him more disposed than ever to laugh at the pessimists. In vain they all tell him that there were men in the crowd for which he had been chosen who had stood there a month. Yes, many months, and not been chosen yet. Yes, he would say, but what sort of men? Broken down tramps and good-for-nothings? Fellows who have spent all their money drinking and want to get more for it? Do you want me to believe that with these arms, and he would clench his fists and hold them up in the air so that you might see the rolling muscles, that with these arms people will ever let me starve? It is plain, they would answer to this, that you have come from the country, from very far in the country. And this was the fact, for Jurgis had never seen a city, and scarcely even a fair-sized town, until he had set out to make his fortune in the world and earn his right to Ona. His father, and his father's father before him, and as many ancestors back as legend could go, had lived in that part of Lithuania known as Brelowitz, the imperial forest. This is a great tract of 100,000 acres, which from time immemorial has been a hunting preserve of the nobility. There are a very few peasants settled in it, holding title from ancient times, and one of these was Antonis Rudkis, who had been reared himself and had reared his children in turn upon half a dozen acres of cleared land in the midst of a wilderness. There had been one son besides Jurgis and one sister. The former had been drafted into the army. That had been over 10 years ago. But since that day, nothing had ever been heard of him. The sister was married, and her husband had bought the place when Antonis had decided to go with his son. It was nearly a year and a half ago that Jurgis had met Ona, at a horse fair 100 miles from home. Jurgis had never expected to get married. He had laughed at it as a foolish trap for a man to walk into. But here, without ever having spoken a word to her, with no more than the exchange of half a dozen smiles, he found himself purple in the face with embarrassment and terror, asking her parents to sell her to him for his wife, and offering his father's 2 horses he had been sent to the fair to sell. But Ona's father proved as a rock. The girl was yet a child, and he was a rich man, and his daughter was not to be had in that way. So Jurgis went home with a heavy heart, and that spring and summer toiled and tried hard to forget. In the fall, after the harvest was over, he saw that it would not do, and tramped the full fortnight's journey that lay between him and Ona. He found an unexpected state of affairs, for the girl's father had died, and his estate was tied up with creditors. Jurgis's heart leaped as he realized that now the prize was within his reach. There was Elzbieta Lukaszite, Teta, or aunt, as they called her, Ona's stepmother, and there were her 6 children, of all ages. There was also her brother Jonas, a dried-up little man who had worked upon the farm. They were people of great consequence, as it seemed to Jurgis, fresh out of the woods. Ona knew how to read, and knew many other things that he did not know. And now the farm had been sold, and the whole family was adrift, all they owned in the world being about 700 rubles, which is half as many dollars. They would have had 3 times that, but it had gone to court. The judge had decided against him, and it had cost the balance to get him to change his decision. Ona might have married and left them, but she would not, for she loved Teta Elzbieta. It was Jonas who suggested that they all go to America, where a friend of his had gotten rich. He would work, for his part, and the women would work, and some of the children, doubtless, they would live somehow. Jurgis, too, had heard of America. That was a country where, they said, a man might earn 3 rubles a day. And Jurgis figured what 3 rubles a day would mean, with prices as they were where he lived, and decided forthwith that he would go to America and marry, and be a rich man in the bargain. In that country, rich or poor, a man was free, was said. He did not have to go into the army. He did not have to pay out his money to rascally officials. He might do as he pleased, and count himself as good as any other man. So America was a place of which lovers and young people dreamed. If one could only manage to get the price of a passage, he could count his troubles at an end. It was arranged that they should leave the following spring, and meantime Jurgis sold himself to a contractor for a certain time and tramped nearly 400 miles from home with a gang of men to work upon a railroad in Smolensk. This was a fearful experience, with filth and bad food and cruelty and overwork, but Jurgis stood it out and came out in fine trim. And with 80 rubles sewed up in his coat, he did not drink or fight because he was thinking all the time of Ona. And for the rest, he was a quiet, steady man who did what he was told to, did not lose his temper often, and when he did lose it, made the offender anxious that he should not lose it again. When they paid him off, he dodged the company gamblers and dram shops, and so they tried to kill him, but he escaped and tramped at home, working at odd jobs and sleeping always with one eye open. So in the summertime, they had all set out for America. At the last moment, there joined them Marija Bursanaiskis, who was a cousin of Ona's. Marija was an orphan and had worked since childhood for a rich farmer of Vilna who beat her regularly. It was only at the age of 20 that it occurred to Marija to try her strength, when she had risen up and nearly murdered the man and then come away. There were 12 in all in the party, 5 adults and 6 children, and Ona, who was a little of both. They had a hard time on the passage. There was an agent who helped them, but he proved a scoundrel and got them into a trap with some officials, and cost them a good deal of their precious money, which they clung to with such horrible fear. This happened to them again in New York, for of course they knew nothing about the country and had no one to tell them, and it was easy for a man in a blue uniform to lead them away and take them to a hotel and keep them there and make them pay enormous charges to get away. The law says that the rate card shall be on the door of a hotel, but it does not say that it shall be in Lithuanian. And we're going to stop there and continue chapter 2 in another video. Thanks.